Rules for investing with others here on the next page. These are kind of lessons learned the hard way, another way to title this page. And I could put a dollar cost to each one of these numbers, but I'd just soon not do that if you don't mind, because then I'd probably total it up and I'd see how much money this seminar really cost me. But I have the right to teach you because I paid some dollars to learn what I'm talking to you about today. Number one, as I say, never put more than one investor in one deal. And I know that's not a commonly followed principle, and some people would argue against that. And I have friends who put dozens and dozens of people in one deal. There's two issues here. One is control. If you have 4 people in a deal, and each has an equal share, how many of them does it take to control the deal? 3, right? Because 2 would be an equal split, right? Don't have any control yet. It takes 3 out of 4 to control the deal. But you need to think through these dynamics if you're going to start putting together groups, because you're going to have a lot of committee decisions like should we sell, should we refinance, what should we do? And when that happens, if it takes 3 out of 4 to agree on something, what could happen on a regular basis? You have a long meeting and nothing happens. See? So I don't like that. I like to have control. Now, if I can put 4 people in a deal and control the deal, I don't have a problem with that. How would you structure a deal with 4 investors and still have absolute control? You could have a management agreement, I guess. You could have a lease with an option where you're leasing this property and you're going to pay the 4 of them $1,000 a month, so they get $250 a month apiece, and you have an option to buy it. That'd be control. How else could you do it? You could do a mortgage. You could just borrow the money. You could have, if you needed $100,000, you could have each of the 4 people put up 25 apiece, or if one guy wanted to put up 50 and the other guys wanted to put up 15 apiece, however it worked out, you could borrow the money. Now you have absolute control, right? So think through the control issue. This is not a religious point with me. I mean, I'm not saying if you have more than one investor in there, you're bad. I'm just saying that you lose some control if you're not careful. So make sure you deal with the control issue. The second issue is communication. If you're going to do a deal like this, talk about how you're going to communicate with these people, what kind of advice you're looking for. Because if you have, it would be a nightmare to me to have 10 investors in one deal. Because now I've got to tell 10 investors the same story. I mean, that's 10 phone calls, or that's 10 letters, or whatever it is. So I don't think that way. I tend to think all I needed in a deal is one investor, because my deals are fairly simple and don't take that much cash. But if you're putting together a deal where you're going to need $1 million, you may need more than one investor. So deal with that, but make sure you stay in control and you deal up front with how you're going to communicate things, both good news and bad news. Number 2 says never buy a property that loses money. Sort of like Will Rogers' advice on the stock market, right? So don't buy them until they go up, then buy them, or something like that. What did he say? Don't buy them unless they go up. Thank you. Don't buy them unless they go up. And that's what I'm saying here. Don't buy a property that loses money. How do you ensure that? What are the things that you can build into this deal so you know the property is going to make money? Buy cheap. Okay, so start off by buying for less than what it's worth. What's another factor in this deal? Good financing, not too much leverage. Make sure that while you're holding it, you're going to have cash flow. And then what's the other critical factor? Well, we talked about that. If we have cash flow, we got the financing, so we have cash flow the whole time we own it. What's the one other thing we have to do to make a profit? Good tenants. That comes to the cash flow side. We're going to sell it right, which means when are we going to sell it? When we want to, okay? Which means we have to build enough time into this deal, because in some markets it may take 10, 12, 15, 20 years for you to have a significant profit. So you don't want to have a short-term deal. You don't want to say 5 years from now we're going to sell it, because it may be worth less than what you paid for it in 5 years. Then you may be shooting yourself in the foot. So those 3 things. You want to make sure you have, and the gross critical of those 3 things is enough time. If you've got enough time and you live in the right part of the world, you're going to make some money. I mean, if you just hold on long enough, everybody looks smart after a while. And I've also said once before today, I'm going to say it again because I wrote it down here. It says splitting a bad deal in half doesn't make it a good deal. Okay? And that's may not sound very profound to you, but we've taken several bad deals and bring 4 people in on them. It doesn't make them a better deal. You just get together and commiserate on a regular basis. But don't, if it's not a good deal to start with for some reason, figure out why it's not a good deal to start with, and don't bring your buddy in on it. That's not a favor to them. Always have the investor contribute enough that the property is virtually guaranteed to make money, and we've diagrammed that for you before the day, but make sure you're buying below the market. Make sure you're driving the price down. Somebody puts up 20 grand cash, drive the price down $20,000 with that $20,000 cash, and make sure you have good terms on the balance. Look for owner financing, or if you're going to have your investor go to the bank, if he can borrow money at 6 or 7%, have him go to the bank. This is a great time to go to the bank. If rates go to 12%, it won't be so great. So now is the time. Look for investors who can fund more than one deal. If I had it to do over again, I would avoid all those guys I invested with who were just one deal candidates. I'm looking for more than one date out of these guys, and so you're looking for people to have deeper pockets and who are long-termers. Not just passing through town. If somebody just moved into town, if I wouldn't rent them a house, I wouldn't invest with them. That make sense to you? I thought that was funny. You didn't like that, huh? When you repay the investor, have another opportunity available. My buddy Warren Harding, and I took Warren's class several times, he said, follow the cash. He said, most real estate brokers get this wrong. They sell a house to somebody, and then they take somebody to lunch after the closing. Who do they take to lunch? The buyer. Buyer's broke. Don't take the buyer to lunch. The seller's walking out the door with a big check. Take the seller to lunch, okay? And if you haven't heard that before, remember that. It's real important. When you buy a piece of real estate from somebody, who's got the money? The seller's got the money. Take that seller out to lunch right after that and ask them what they're going to do with that money. Because many times they're going to put it in the bank at 3 or 4%. These are folks that might loan you that money at 6 or 7%. Follow the cash in the deal. When you have an investor, and if you have somebody who's given you $50,000 to buy a house, and now you've owned this house for a while and you've sold the house, and you're giving this investor his money back, what should you do? Follow the money. Don't go out and looking for a new investor. You already got one. This person already likes you if you did a good deal. Go out and do another deal with the same person. In fact, what can you do to shortcut that situation? What can you do so they never touch the cash?
Substitution of collateral.
Well, yeah, that's a good one. If you borrowed the money from them, just give them other collateral. Never pay them back. Just move that loan to another property. What if they've owned it with you? What can you do? What? Yeah. If Steve and I own a house and then he put up the $50,000 10 years ago and now we're selling it and his share is $150,000, he doesn't want to pay taxes on $150,000, so what are we going to do? We're going to find another property we can buy and do a tax-free exchange and let him bring that money with him to this next property. So be smart about this, and you won't need as many investors. Take care of your investors. Don't let them pay taxes unnecessarily. Follow the cash. Have as few investors as possible. It's like having as few properties as possible. If you make it work with fewer moving parts, your life will be much simpler. Don't overpromise, guarantee, or project profits. I skipped number 7. 7 says, write down your agreement in a form to protect you. I'm going to show you several ways to write down agreements here toward the end of this class, and my strategy is always to keep it as simple as possible. I've had people send me, in fact, I looked over one partnership agreement right before I taught this class. A guy sent me, it was 27 pages long, legal size. 27 pages. What's wrong with an agreement like that? You just can't understand it all. I don't care how many times you read it, you're probably going to miss something. I get mine on one page, and you'll see it. And I think if you can't get it said on one page, and lawyers sometimes have a problem with this, but if you can't get it said on one page, and I took all 27 pages of that partnership agreement, and I looked at my one page, there's not one thing in that 27 pages that I didn't cover on one page. They're all covered in there. But you just don't have to cover it, you don't have to go back to the Garden of Eden on all this stuff. Okay. So don't overpromise. Don't talk about things going to double in 3 years. You don't know that. Say, look, we'll probably exaggerate the other way. It gives you credibility. Say, look, we might have to hold this stuff 100 years just to get our money back. Say silly things like that. Then people know that's not true, and they know that you're smart. But it makes you look smarter than if you say this stuff's going to double in 3 years, because everybody knows that's not true either. Talk about the risk involved, if there is any risk. If somebody's actually signing hard on a note where they promise to pay, or if there's some liability on a lease or something, talk about that. So talk about the bad news going in. That's not a bad mistake. It's better. It's good sales technique to talk about bad things that can happen before you close the deal. Talk about the length of time you're likely going to hold this property, and if there's going to be a minimum holding period. For example, if you're going to lease this property from somebody with an option to buy it, you're going to talk specifically about how long that's going to be. And I would suggest to you that you never put a deal together for less than 10 years. 10 years is a short period of time in this business. It flies by. Discuss what will happen if they need their money early. If you're going to do a 10-year lease option with somebody and they're going to need to get out of this thing in less than 10 years, They have the right to sell it to somebody else, which is fine. It'll be subject to your option. If you bring somebody else in or you buy them out, what's probably going to happen? They're not going to make much money. Does that ever happen in real life where people have to get out of a deal early and don't make much money? Happens every day in every town. I've watched one guy in this town, I won't mention his name, but he's been a partner of several different people during the time I've been observing him over the last 30 years. He has outlasted every one of his partners, and to my knowledge, he's bought out every one of his partners for less than they put in the deal to start with. So if one of his partners puts up $100,000, they're in the deal for 7 years, the partner needs to get out. This guy said, I'm not ready to get out yet. So what happens? He buys him out for less than $100,000, or he buys him out for the same $100,000 maybe on terms, 6% interest till I pay you. So the last guy out of a partnership generally comes out ahead. So if you didn't have that thought before, write that down. If you try to get out of a deal and there's a bunch of people in there, the first guy out is going to get cleaned out. It's going to cost you some money. So that's another reason not to invest with a bunch of other people. Because almost, unless this is your strategy, almost always if you put 5 or 6 or 7 people together, somebody's going out of the deal. I bought the only stock deal I've ever made money on in my life was some bank stock here in town. And it was a deal where they put this bank together, and it's been together for 6 or 7 years. And what kind of dividends do small banks pay in the first 6 or 7 years? Anybody own any bank stock? The answer is none. They pay absolutely no dividends. And what happens to the value of that bank stock? Not much, because there's no market in it, So this guy had to get out, and he sold me his bank stock for less than what he paid for it 6 or 7 years ago. And then they sold his bank eventually 5 or 6 or 7 years later, and I've actually made some money, not because I was smart, but because I bought this guy's stock cheap. He had to get out. And I didn't make much money, but I did make a little bit. And that's the only stock bragging you'll hear me do this whole class. That's the only time I've made money in the stock market. Discuss what will happen. We already did that. Do not pay a high rate of interest for the risk involved. You have to establish the risk. I watch people pay high rates of interest when they borrow money, but they're entitled to pay that high rate because they generally are trying to borrow all the money they have in a deal. If you go out and buy a house for $110,000, and then it needs $20,000 in fix-up work, and you call somebody to borrow this $130,000, what kind of interest rate are they going to charge you? It's going to be high, isn't it? It's going to be high. Everybody understand what I'm saying here? If you try to borrow all the money out of a deal that you've got in it, plus your fix-up costs, where you have absolutely no risk in this deal, and you go to a private lender or even a bank, will a bank make you that loan to start with? No, they won't. So you have to go to a private lender to borrow that money. And if you go to a private lender, you're going to pay a high rate of interest, right? Now, is that wrong? Absolutely not wrong, because isn't the lender taking a lot of risk? Sure, you don't have anything in here. And if you walk away from the deal, what does the lender get back most of the time? What's this collateral look like? It's not quite fixed, typically, right? When you repossess a house that the guy's working on, a lot of time when you get it back, it's not in perfect shape. It still needs some work. So you get back a project. You don't get back a piece of real estate that's ready to sell. So because the lender is taking some risk, the lender is entitled to a high interest rate. If you take that same deal and you put, how much did you tell me they're going to charge you? What's the interest rate going to be on that deal? 15. Anybody want to bid that up a little bit? Anybody pay higher than 15? Is 15 the going rate now, Frank? Rates come down? There's funding fees. I like that. That didn't cost anybody. But if you take this same deal, $110,000, $20,000 fix up, so that's $130,000. And if somebody would come along and put $30,000 cash into this deal, and now only want to borrow $100,000, what would happen to the interest rate? It would go down, wouldn't it? And why does it go down? Because the lender has a lot less risk. The guy putting $30,000 cash in this deal is less likely to walk away from it and give back a house half fixed up to the lender, right? Okay. Now, let me just have you do this math. If 15% is the right number on this $130,000, what's 130 times 15%? 13 and 75, $20,500 a year. That sound right? $20,500. Is that right, Frank? You can check my math. if I can borrow the same $100,000, what would the rate be at that $100,000 after I put $30,000 down? Can I borrow that at 10%? Is that a lot safer? 10% is still not cheap, is it? But if I borrow this at 10%, I did that so you can do the math. How much is that a year? 10,000. Good. What's the difference between 10,000 a year and $20,500 a year? Can you do that in your head? $10,500, right? So if you invest that $30,000 cash, how much return are you making on that $30,000 cash? $10,500, right? Everybody do that math? How much is that? That's 30%, isn't it? So my message to you, if you're in the business of borrowing money at 15% right now, if you can scrape up a little bit of money and start making some down payment and start taking some of the risk in these deals, you can save yourself a lot of money here, can't you? You're not going to change the system. You can't talk somebody out of 15% if you're putting nothing down, because that's probably pretty cheap money. Okay? But if you'll put something down, then you can negotiate a better rate, and it's a better deal. Most people would rather have 10% when you putting 30% down and they never have to worry about it than loaning you money at 15% and have to worry about it all day long. Keep control of management decisions. We talked about a couple ways to do that, and we'll talk about some paperwork after lunch, but the management decisions that have to be made, who you're going to rent to, all those type of things, you want to do by yourself. You don't want to have to call somebody for approval before you rent a house to somebody, because that happens real time, doesn't it? So you want to make those decisions yourself. So make sure you're in control, either using a lease option or you being on title or some kind of management agreement. Be clear on how you'll split the profits and if you'll take a commission or management fee. If you're going to take a commission or a management fee, just be clear up front. I'm not saying that that's against the law, but you should tell people what you're going to do. One of the mistakes I've made with some of my one-time investors is I've never taken any kind of management fee, and now I own half interest in a house with somebody. It's been 20 years later, and who's doing all the work? And who's feeling bad about it? That'd be me. Because I'm making them all this money, I'm doing all the work, and all they did was years and years ago put up $5,000 or $10,000 to buy this house, and that's the only deal we've ever made with each other. I've been trying to buy these people out for years, of course, but it's too late. It's too late for me to go back and say, oh, I'm going to start charging you 10% management fee or anything else, because I didn't make that deal going in up front. So if I was going to do that again, especially with somebody who's just going to be a one-time investor, I want to get paid a fair amount for what I'm doing. And if one person's doesn't feel like they've got a fair shake, what happens? The deal falls apart at some point, or somebody starts mismanaging because they feel like they're not getting their money's worth out of it. Agree on how title will be held. If you're going to do something interesting, land trust or lease options or undivided half interest tenants in common, you should know enough to explain that to somebody. And I would diagram it for them. I would draw them a picture. I like pictures. Most people, I think, learn visually. So make sure you can explain to somebody what you're going to do. If it's going to be cute and if it's going to give them some tax benefits, that's very good stuff. But you need to be able to explain so they understand it. And have them explain it back to you so you know they understand it. Never invest with anybody you don't trust. If they brag about taking advantage of somebody else, they'll do it to you. Isn't that the absolute truth? And I've had people sit in my office and tell me stories. And I'm delighted they did, because after they tell me those stories, I don't want anything to do with these people. I mean, how they took advantage of the last guy they invested with. Well, you want to let people have a little latitude. Let them tell those stories so you get it right. Let's talk about borrowing a little bit. On page 16, different ways to split your profit here. Two things we can do. Number one, we can give somebody a guaranteed return on their money. And when we do that, we typically are borrowing money from somebody. So if I want to give you a guaranteed return, we have two things to look at, don't we? We look at how much equity there is in this property, so how much risk there is for the investor. If I'm buying something with absolutely nothing down, I've got to be careful, because now whoever I'm dealing with is going to want a high interest rate, and I probably can't support a long-term investment with interest rates that look like 10 or 12 or 15%. What interest rate will your typical house support? 8 to 10? Do the math. If I go out and buy, let's say, a $120,000 house for $100,000, and I rent that house for $900 a month, and I net $600 a month, I'm just round figuring this out, but those are probably pretty close to real numbers. So I've got $600 a month net income. How much return is that? What's 600 times 12? 7,200? How does 7,200 compare to $100,000? About 7%, isn't it? About 7%. And those are real numbers, aren't they? do the real numbers in your town. Go back and study a house you already own and do the real numbers. Say, how much did I collect in rent last year? How much did I spend on expenses? How much did I have left over to make payments? And what kind of rate of return? If I own this house free and clear, what kind of rate of return am I making on that money? And I bet you it starts with a 7. It might start with an 8 if you're an exceptionally good manager. It might even start with a 4 or 5 if you had to put a new air conditioner in or put a new roof on. Or it could start with a 0 or a minus. It could start with a minus if you put a new roof on, right? Because you don't always get cash flow on these things. So you have to be smart. And if you're going to borrow money from an investor long term, you have to be careful not to promise to pay more than that. Okay? Now, when would an investor give you better than a 7% interest rate? Or why would an investor give you better than 7%? When he has part of the deal, so he's getting compensated someplace else, and when he has a low risk. Low risk. Let me tell you about a deal I put together a couple years ago, which has been a very good deal for me, and it's been a good deal for the investor. We had 3 houses that were worth about $150,000 apiece. And these were houses that originally had $80,000 loans on them. And these loans had paid down because we'd owned these houses for a long time. And they'd paid down to about $40,000. So each of these houses had $40,000 in debt against it. So I owed a total of $120,000 on real estate that was worth a total of about $450,000. Is there a lot of collateral there? A lot of collateral there, isn't it? Those loans safe? They're safe for the lender. They're not really safe for me. I mean, if I lost one of those houses and I couldn't make the payments, wouldn't I feel bad? Yeah, there's a lot to lose there. Now, here's the funny thing. My payments on these loans were about $650 a month. So I'm paying $1,950 a month to service that $120,000 in debt. That's a big number for $120,000, isn't it? I went to an investor who I've done a lot of business with, and I borrowed this $120,000 at 8%. So now I'm paying $9,600 a year instead of times 12. What's 12 times 1950? Somebody's got a calculator out there. $23,400 a year. So what happened to my cash flow? It jumped up by about $13,000 just on those 3 houses. That's a real deal. And I gave the investor an interest only, because remember we talked about interest only, an 8% interest only loan, and I secured it with a big blanket mortgage. And blanket mortgage means that the mortgage covers all 3 properties. So I had all 3 legal descriptions on this mortgage. I gave him a blanket mortgage on all 3 properties. And the terms of that note say that any time I pay down some of the principal, if I want to pay down $50,000 on the principal, my payments drop because it's an interest-only loan. So if I have $50,000 cash in my hand and I don't know what to do with it, I can take it over to my investor and pay him down $50,000, and next month, what will happen to my payment? It'll drop down, because now I'm just paying him 8% on the $70,000. Okay? On the other hand, if I need more money, I can call this investor up and say, I need an extra $100,000. If he loans it to me, does he have enough collateral? Yeah, he does. And I'm going to leave that mortgage in place until both of us die. Okay? Because as long as I need to borrow money from this particular investor, I'm going to let him own these 3 houses or have a mortgage on these 3 houses, okay, as his collateral. So I can borrow money, pay it back, borrow money, pay it back. The mortgage is always in place. We wrote title insurance one time on this mortgage. He'll always have the collateral for that money. And that's a real good system, isn't it? It's a good system if you've owned property for a long time. It's a good idea to kind of reevaluate what you owe and see if you can increase your cash flow. If my interest rate before was just a little above 8%, but it wasn't much above 8%, the difference between this payment and this payment is the principal payments. I have big principal payments. And as I said earlier, big principal payments aren't necessarily good for you. They're good for the bank, but they're not good for you. So study that. Blanket mortgages make a lot of sense. Yes, sir. If Frank has this blanket mortgage, and I call Frank up and say, I've got house A here sold, I would like you to sign a release from this mortgage for house A. If he did that, would he still have enough collateral for his loan?
Would you then take 1/3 of the principal, out?
Well, let me follow my line of thought. What if I didn't pay him a dime? What if I say, Frank, I'd like this whole $120,000 to stay on these houses, but I'm going to sell one off. Now you just have two houses for collateral. Is he still covered? Because now he has $300,000 collateral for a $120,000 loan. He's still pretty safe, isn't he? That, I probably wouldn't have a problem selling that to Frank if he was my lender. On the other hand, if I exchange house A, okay, if I just tired of house A, so I exchange it for another house here, which we'll call B, which looks just about the same. It's a little smaller, but it's worth $100,000. I could do what's called a substitution of collateral. I could get house A released and give him house B. I give him another mortgage, really would have the same legal description, and to Frank, I give him more collateral if he wants more collateral, okay, and secured by the same note. So if I need to, I can move one out, move the other one in. It takes two pieces of paper. It takes a release and takes a new mortgage.
And what was did you buy it just for the mortgage, or what was your purchase price? How did your cash flow work out on this deal?
On this house B? Well, I don't know.
All three.
Well, all three of them I bought for $80,000 a piece a long time ago, okay? Nothing down, taking over loans, and then the loans have paid down over a period of about 15, 20 years. And they've gone up in value during the same period of time.
You bought it $80,000 a piece.
I bought them for the loan balance. I bought those three houses, which I still own those three houses. I can take them out and show them to you. I bought them for the loan balances back in 1981.
And they were $40,000 by the loan balance.
They are now. It's 2001. It's 20 years later. 20 years later, they paid 20 years down the road on a 30-year loan, are about half paid down. That's about the math. So 20 years later, I'm still paying payments of $650 a month on this $80,000 mortgage. That's what it was back in 1981, and then now today the payments are still $650, but I only owe $40 on those houses because they've paid down. So look at the stuff you've owned for a long period of time. That's the stuff where it makes sense to do this. Now, let me just throw one other thought out there before we go. This doesn't have to be Frank's money. This could be Frank's pension plan money. Okay? That'd be even a smoother deal, wouldn't it? When we start borrowing money from people, the first thing you want to ask yourself is, how are these people paying any taxes on the money? If somebody's in a high tax bracket, I don't want to be borrowing money from them because now they're going to be in a higher tax bracket. So I'm going to see if Frank or whoever I'm borrowing this money from has any kind of entity they own that can loan me this money and not pay taxes when they receive it. I want to be able to deduct the interest, but if I can deduct the interest and they don't have to pay taxes on it, that's the best of all worlds. Especially if it's a private pension plan, there's no overhead. You know, he's self-directed. He doesn't have a big building to worry about. He's not paying somebody to run this thing for him. That's the best possible scenario. So I go out of my way to structure deals where I'm borrowing money from somebody's pension plan, and I'll talk about the flip side of that this afternoon because I'm happy to make loans out of my pension plans to people to make good deals if something else happens. And what else could happen? Is it possible at the same time Frank is loaning me it's $120,000 at 8%? And first of all, is that a pretty good deal for Frank? Not a bad deal for Frank at all. In fact, I'd like to get a little bit more of that from you, Frank. I'm just kidding, because I haven't borrowed money from Frank ever. His rates are a little high for me. But I mean, that could be a good deal for Frank because 8%, is this safe money? This is safe money. This is not high-risk money. This is low management, absolutely. This is like money in the bank money, but you're getting twice as much as you get in the bank. So that's a good deal for Frank. But to make it even better, at the same time we're making this deal, what if I came down here and let Frank in on a deal that we're buying $50,000 below the market? Okay? And he loaned me money for that one too, but now he's going to get half a $50,000 profit. See, and that's what I say when I match people together. I'm typically matching people together. If Frank's good to me this year and is making me deals at low interest rates, then I'm going to bring him a deal pretty soon that's going to make him a bonus of maybe $20,000 or $30,000. And by doing that, and this bonus, if we're smart, could be in his Roth IRA. How many people have Roth IRAs? Your homework assignment is to go get one if you don't have one. You're missing the boat if you don't have a Roth IRA. And I'm serious about this because if Frank has a Roth IRA and I let him make $25,000 profit in that Roth, how's that taxed? Not taxed at all. So what we can do is if Frank, instead of charging me 15% up here, will charge me 8% up here, I can get him a little bit more down here. We might get him up to 15% when all the dust settles, but we can do it in a smarter way. We can do it in a way that the government doesn't get their share. Okay. Sharing profit as tenants in common here, number 2. We're going to talk, and we'll show you some paperwork about holding title as tenants in common. But how many are familiar with that term, tenants in common? What does that mean? If you and I are tenants in common, and I own, and you also see this language associated with tenants in common, you'll find tenants in common, and then you'll say an undivided interest. A lot of times it's undivided 1/2 interest. So it's going to be an undivided interest. How does that different from a divided interest? Can you have a divided half interest? We just had a piece of dirt. Couldn't we easily divide it? And I could say Steve owns the west half and John owns the east half. That's a divided half interest, isn't it? Okay, we own half interest in that. This could be a platted subdivision lot where we can't really divide it, but we could still own half and half of that thing. If we do an undivided interest, let's put a roof on this thing now. We do an undivided interest. That means when the plumbing stops up, Steen owns half of it and I own half of it. Okay, we own an undivided half interest in every part of this house, which means we benefit in every way from any increase in value. We benefit from any tax shelter available. We benefit from any cash flow or any loss. So we actually own an undivided part of anything that happens to this house. But in the law, and this is a cute thing, and I like this part a lot, in the law, we still own half and half on this house. So if Steve would have some exciting part of his life, and somebody got a judgment against Steve, let's say a $100,000 lien against Steve, what would that $100,000 lien attach? His half interest, not my half interest. And this is what makes this way of holding title good for you as an investor, because it protects you from problems that the other person has. That's a little different than a partnership. Okay? And I'm going to talk about there's some good and bad here, but this is a good way to hold title. I've held title this way a lot. Now there's a better way to do it, I think, and that's using a land trust, and I'll talk about that later. Because with a land trust, now neither Steve nor my name shows up on a public record, which might be good for both of us. Because if Steve gets a lien against him or I get a lien against me, it wouldn't attach this house. But the important point is that if there is something happens to Steve, it's going to attach his half, not my half. And I've had several exciting things happen. In fact, there's a page in the back of the book I'll cover later today where people have done some things in their lives that's caused them to lose their half interest. If somebody takes Steve's half interest away from him, and I structured this deal right, who's still in charge? Me. Because I put the deal together, I'm collecting the rent, I'm making the loan payments, I'm doing all of that, I'm maintaining the house, I'm doing all the things I need to do to run this house. So I have sort of a silent partner here that's come in and taken Steve's position. Is that going to affect my life much? Not really. And what's the possibility after somebody else comes in here and ends up with Steve's half? What just could happen? I might be able to buy him out cheap or buy him out on terms. So it really doesn't affect me in a negative way. It could be a good investor, but it typically is the IRS or somebody's ex-wife or some bankruptcy creditor. It's generally not a good investor. Okay, but there's still opportunity, and the opportunity is you might be able to buy them out cheap. Can they force you to sell this house? Yes, they can. They can go to court. They can ask for a partition suit. They can force a sale. But if they force the sale of the house, it'd be a lot like a foreclosure sale. And let's say this house is worth a total of $100,000. What would it sell for at the courthouse steps on an all-cash auction? A lot less than 100, right? Who should be the buyer? You. Right. So I mean, it doesn't take. You got the right answer. I'm proud of you. This is not bad news. Not bad news. You may have to do a little work. You may have to line up another investor to come in with that much cash to buy them out. But you control this house, don't you? It's your tenant. So you've got a lot of things. You've got a lot of control over this house. So it's not bad news, and that's why tenants in common is an excellent way to split things up. Another way to secure the investor, and how does the investor secure? The investor is secured because their name's on the deed. The name's on the deed. If Steve and I own this house together and he's put up the money, his name is on the deed. Now let's just go one step further. let's say when we bought this house, Steve put up $40,000 cash. Okay? If he's doing that, if he's putting up $40,000 when we buy this house, and our agreement is that when we sell this house, he gets the first $40,000 back because that was a down payment, and then we split the profit 50-50, how are we going to write that down so we remember that 10 or 15 years from now? Best way to write it down is with a note. A note. If Steve is putting up $40,000 to buy this whole house, and he's buying 100% interest for $40,000, but we're going to end up, at the end of the day, owning 50% as tenants in common, he's actually only buying half of this house, isn't he? So he's buying half of this house. If the down payment is $40,000, his half of the down payment is $20,000. What's my half of the down payment? $20,000. And where am I getting my $20,000? Steve's putting it up, so I'm borrowing it from him. Okay, I'm borrowing it from him, and I'm going to give Steve an IOU for $20,000. Now, depending on the size of this down payment and how much work there is involved in this deal, I'm going to negotiate with Steve an interest rate and a payment schedule that I like. And the one I like the best is no interest and no payments till we sell the house. Okay? And that's, I think, the proper thing to do. What is he giving up? What kind of interest would he normally make on $20,000? What do you get in the bank? 3 or 4%? What's 4% of $20,000? $800 a year? Okay? And even if it was twice that much, if it was $1,600 a year, if I will agree to do the management of this property, isn't that a benefit to Steve? And is it worth more than $1,600 a year if I'll manage that house all year long? I think it is. So it's a good trade-off. $20,000 that he's loaning me at no interest and no payments is a good trade-off if I will do the work. Okay? So I think that's a good balance. Now, if he was putting up $100,000 to buy this house, it'd be a little different discussion. Now we might have to agree to making payments on that $100,000 because he may have been earning, $400 or $500 a month before he gave it to me. And we'll get to that a little bit later. Now, number 4, holding title and land trust to keep your name off the public record. There's a land trust deed in here, a land trust agreement, and at lunchtime, if you want to go ahead, read all that, if you're unfamiliar with that technique, go ahead and do that. But a land trust allows somebody else as trustee to hold title to this property. And this is a very good technique. If I call my friend Gary here and say, Gary, I'm buying this house, I need somebody to hold title for me, would you be my trustee? And he agrees. I could take title as Gary, and I won't use your last name, but Gary as trustee, and he could hold title to this house for me. And what does that mean? That means that he is going to be the record title holder down at the courthouse. His name will show up on the deed, but we're going to have an agreement between us that says that I'll indemnify him. Actually, the statute in the state of Florida protects him as a trustee from any liability, but it says I will collect the rent, I'll do all the management. Your only job is to hold title as trustee. So we may not be fooling a whole bunch of people. Who probably wouldn't we be fooling? The tenant who's coming to my office and paying rent each month. They probably think I have something to do with this property because I'm collecting the money and I probably rented them a house and I probably talk to them a lot like the owner when I rented them the house. So we may not be fooling the tenant, but if somebody does a public record search, what won't show up? My name won't show up. I don't really have asset protection here, but it keeps my name off the public record, and that alone is probably worth the aggravation of finding some trustee to hold title, especially with certain kinds of property. I bought 16 houses from one builder several years ago, and when I did that, we formed a joint venture, and I hate to use that term, but we decided that I actually exchanged him a couple houses, half interest in a couple houses, for his half interest in all 16 houses. So when all the dust settled, we ended up owning 18 houses together. Neither one of us wanted to be on the public records with the other guy. Okay? So we took title and trust. We had a guy who acted as trustee for us and held title to all 18 properties as trustee, so it confused a lot of folks. People would look us up on the public records and we wouldn't be there. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. But you still don't have, and I want to make sure you understand this, you really don't have any asset protection. If somebody wants to sue you, they can still sue you. And if you're the manager of this property and you've done something wrong and you've got some direct connection with this property, I think, they can still get to your assets. Because if somebody does sue me and get a judgment against me and there's a sharp lawyer involved, and I hope there's not, but it typically is, they're going to ask me to raise my hand and say, what do you own? And include the beneficial interest in any trust you might own. So if I still own a beneficial interest in this trust, I've got to tell them. And so they can get to the beneficial interest in the trust. So it's not asset protection strategy we're talking about here, but we're talking about a way to hold title where maybe if I'm buying property with Tawes here, that we both don't want to be on title to this house. No reason for everybody to know that we own this house together. Okay? And especially if you get famous and do a lot of seminars, it's good to keep your name off the public record. Structuring deals when the investor does not have the cash. Number 6 here. If you have an investor who doesn't have cash, what can he bring to the table? Credit. Let him go down and borrow the money. If he doesn't have cash or credit, probably you want to stay away from this person. But if he doesn't have cash or credit, but they do have a lot of income, and it's somebody you want to invest with for some reason, and they have another asset, maybe they own the house they live in, one other way to structure this deal is to let them give you a note. Let's say it's a $15,000 equity in a property, which will be their half interest. So this is a $150,000 house with a $120,000 loan on it. Now let's just say, for the sake of argument, this is a bank loan at 8%. What kind of cash flow will that house have? If you have a $150,000 house, you have a $120,000 bank loan at 8%, what kind of cash flow will that house have? None. Probably lose some money. That's not going to have much cash flow. Everybody agree with that? I'm just round figuring this, but that's not a house that will have any cash flow for years to come. At some point you'll raise the rent, you'll have a little, but first couple of years it's not going to have any cash flow. If you have somebody who wants to buy in and they don't have any money in the bank and they don't have any credit, and for some reason you want to let these people in on a deal, what could that reason be? You like them or they're related to you, one of the two. They're not necessarily the same. There is $30,000 equity in this house, isn't there? Everybody see that? Half that would be how much? $15,000. Sell them half interest by letting them write you a note and a check for $300 a month. No interest. Is that a good deal for them? No interest? For 50 months. And have them secure this note with something they don't want to lose, like the house they live in. Now, is 0% interest a good deal for them? Yeah, it is. And if they have cash flow and they want to become an investor, the only way they're going to become an investor is start saving their money up. So what are you setting up here? You're setting up a forced savings account. Name one other payment that people have that's about $300 a month. Their car payment. Tell them not to buy a new car for the next 5 years. Drive the 2-year-old one he's got, and give you $300 a month for the next 5 years, and they'll own half of this house. And tell me about this house 50 months from now, which isn't 5 years, it's 4 years, isn't it? 4 years and 2 months. Tell me about this house 4 years and 2 months from now. What would the cash flow be like then? It'd be better, won't it? It will raise the rent a little bit by then. So by then, that house will make some money. And what will your situation be like during the next 50 months? How much will your house be making? Your half. You're going to be making $300 a month, aren't you? Now, if you've been in business for a while, is it possible to buy a $150,000 house by just taking over a $120,000 loan? Sure it is. Those deals are out there all the time. So you can buy that house, and if you want to bring somebody in to own half of that house to provide you a little bit of cash flow, that's not a bad way to structure a deal. Make sure you stay in control. Make sure you take some kind of security for this $300 a month. If you want to turn it inside out and do it a little bit more creatively, you could actually sell them an option to buy half interest in this house, and their option payments would be $300 a month. So if they stop making you that payment, their option wouldn't be any good. Everybody follow me there? Okay, that would be good. If you let them own half interest in this house today, what do they get starting today? They get some tax shelter, which will probably help them pay that $300 a month, because it may save them part of that. I won't tell you it'll save all of that, but it might save them part of that on their tax return. They own half interest in a house that breaks even. Okay, page 17, creatively structured investor deals. I'm going to talk here about several ways to put together deals with investors. And if you are an investor, look at your side of this deal. If you're somebody looking for money, look at the other side of it. And we'll discuss both sides as we go through here, what the benefits are for both people, and why these deals work for both people. Number one says here, lease option for wholesale rent and half profit over the loan balance. Let me show you a deal we're doing right now. This is a house that's been sitting empty for a while, and the fellow who owns it has never lived there. Why would he want to make some kind of deal?
No income.
Yeah, an empty house doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? Does it cost money to own an empty house? Yeah. This house has a loan on it. The house has a loan balance of $120,000. So every month he lets that house sit empty, it's costing him probably at least $1,000 a month with taxes and insurance. Plus he has to mow the grass, and the house is sitting there empty, so it's going to be expensive to maintain long term. He needs to make some kind of deal. But he's had a hard time making a deal because he has a hard time giving away the profit on his house. He wants to keep the profit and make a deal. Okay? So people have been trying and have been working out. So I made him a little unusual deal. I said, what are your payments in this $120,000 loan? His payments are about $900 a month. I said to him, I will lease that house from you for your payments for the $900 a month, net. And I'll take the house in as-is condition. You don't ever have to see this house again. You don't have to worry about fixing anything that's broken in this house. And I will give you half the profit we make on this house over $190,000, which is the number he's got in his mind, which is his hard cash in this deal. Hard cash in this deal. The house today is supposedly worth between $250,000 and $300,000. Hard to tell exactly what it's worth, okay? But it's not worth probably that much unless it looks a little bit better than it does today. One reason, the house sat empty for a long time doesn't look so good. So somebody needs to go in there and do something to that house. So I've got an option to buy, if you want to write this down, 1/2 interest for $95,000. Well, it's hard to tell exactly what it's worth, but it's worth more than $200,000. I wouldn't do this deal unless that property is worth more than $200,000 because I have minimum profits that I work at. And my minimum profit in a house in the $200,000 range is about $40,000. I'd like to make $40,000. But we're going to examine several parts of this deal. When I have an option to buy this house, an option to buy half interest in this house for $95,000, if I decide not to buy the house, how much do I lose? Not much, because I'm not giving them any money up front. It's a low down payment deal for me. I'm not giving them any cash up front. I'm going to start paying him $900 a month starting December 1st. This is a deal I'm doing right now.
You didn't have to pay for the option.
Didn't have to pay anything for the option. The consideration for the option, and using that term loosely, is I'm going to take the house in as-is condition, and I'm going to be responsible for all the work. And I'm going to market this house. And I'm going to sell this house for more than $190,000, because if I don't sell it for more than $190,000, I don't get paid anything. But the other side of that, my risk is I have to start making payments of $900 a month. Well, that's a lot of money, but I could turn around and re-rent this house to somebody else if I needed to for more than $900 a month. So if I want to recover that $900 a month, I can sublet it to somebody else. So I'll have to make a decision, and this is a real deal we're doing right now, and we'll close on it next week. I'll have to make a decision pretty fast on whether we want to just try to remarket this house the way it sits, see if I can find a cash buyer, because if I can sell it for $220,000 real fast, I'd make $15,000 and he'd make $15,000, I'd probably take it. I'll take a quick $15,000. On the other hand, if somebody comes along and wants to do something different, if somebody wanted to do a longer term closing, a 1-year lease option, I could sell this house to somebody else on a 1-year lease option, and if I get a little higher price, if I could get $250,000 for it or $240,000, I'd do that. And if somebody wanted to come along and buy the house on terms, I could even finance it, because this fella is probably available for one more negotiation session if I came to him with a different kind of offer. Right now he gets half the profit over $190,000, but what if somebody came along and offered me, and I'm just going to pick a number here, $270,000. Well, let me finish this off and I'll come get your question. But they wanted to put $20,000 down and finance the $250,000, and let me carry a $250,000 note. If that happened, I'd go back to my investor who has this $190,000 coming and saying, maybe we can work this out. Maybe I can give you $190,000 plus part of that note, and I keep the other part of that note. Now, somebody had a question here. Yes, sir.
From 120 to 190, you didn't do any negotiating?
Oh, I did. It took us a while to get to that figure. Yeah, he started higher than that, but 190 is a good price. In my mind, that 190 is a good price. It's below market. So what I'm giving him, rather than, he wouldn't sell me the house for just 190. He would not do that because he knows the house is worth more than 190. So I appealed to his greed, and I said, I know what I'm doing. You obviously have not taken the time or put the effort in this house to market it, so it's costing you. What you're doing right now is not smart. It's costing you at least $1,000 a month to let that house sit there, plus the interest that you're not earning on your equity. So why don't you let me do something? Let me do the work here. And that's what I have to offer. Remember what we had to offer? I had my reputation, plus I'll do the work. I'll take this house over, I'll do the work, I'll do the smartest thing I can, because the smarter I am and the more over 190 I can get for this house, the better off we both are. So if I can sell it for 200, you get 195. If I can sell it for 250, you get 230 or 220, I guess. So you can do the math, but he gets half of everything over $190,000. So he's betting that I'm going to sell it, and he's pushing me. Go get them, get 350 if you can. Now, I don't think the house is worth anything close to 350, but the house is probably worth closer to 250 today. And if we do a little bit of work on it, we might be able to get 275 for it, because the market's still pretty good. Is this a good deal for the guy who owns the empty house?
Yeah.
Sure.
It really is, because now, number one, if this was your house, how would you feel after you made this deal with me? You'd feel relieved, wouldn't you? Say, I don't have to worry about that house anymore. I can go worry about something else now. Because this house, not that you have a check yet, but the problem is solved. When I start making those payments, one thing you can bet on is I'm going to be thinking about this house a lot, right? This house isn't going to get on the back burner for me. I'm thinking about this house. It's in my town. I'm in the house business. I'll do my best to do something smart. And I've told this guy that I can do something that you won't do. For example, we did another house very similar to this summer, and we took a smaller house in as a down payment. If somebody came along and wants to buy this house, what do they probably own now? They're probably not coming out of an apartment. They probably own a house. So if somebody came to me and liked this house, but they said to me, John, we would buy your house, but we can't buy your house until we do what? Sell our house. I'd say to them, how much equity do you have in your house? Let's go look at it. And if they had a $150,000 house, with a $100,000 loan on it, I would take that $50,000 equity as down payment on this house and let them go out and get a new loan for the balance. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, we agreed on a price of $270, and I let them use this $50,000 equity as a down payment. How much would they owe me? $220. Could they get a $220,000 loan on a $270,000 house? Sure they could. That would be no problem at all. Let them go out and get $220,000 cash, bring it to the table. What would happen to that money? Who gets the $220? We have to pay off the $190, don't we? Okay, so there's $30,000 left. Now we have to have another renegotiation probably. I may be willing to let him keep the $30,000 in cash if I keep the $50,000 house. That might be a good deal. That'd be a good deal, because I have nothing in this either, do I? So now I've got a free $50,000 house. That'd be okay. Or we might split the $30,000 in cash. He takes 15 and I take 15, and we split the $50,000 equity in the house. Now, this fellow may turn out to be a long-term investor. He has some equity up here. I have a feeling he probably has some money in the bank, too. He just let this house sit there and it didn't seem to bother him a whole bunch. So when you find a deal like that, your mind should start working. You say, maybe this fellow has some more money. We want to treat him fairly. We want to make a good deal. But people will respect you when you make them a good deal. I mean, they're not looking for somebody to give them too much money. Then they figure you don't know what you're talking about. This guy knows I know what I'm talking about. He sees how I'm going to make a profit on this deal, and that doesn't bother him because he knows I'm going to do some work to make that profit. He sees that if I do something like this is something he would never do. He would never take somebody else's equity as a down payment on this house, but this wouldn't scare me at all, would it? Because I know what I can do here. I can either rent this house or I can sell it to somebody else. So taking a smaller house and on trades a big house is a good technique, I think, and it makes it easier to market a house. Yes, sir?
How long of an option period did he give you, or is he giving?
10 years. 10 years. But we're not going to take 10 years. We're not going to take 10 years. We're going to do something far short of 10 years, because this house, just as it sits, would not be a good long-term rental. It needs some work. So we're going to have to go in there and do some work.
John,
Yes.
do you want sale clause?
Might have a due on sale clause over here. Is this a high-risk loan to the lender? Probably not. I mean, if I had to refi, if I really liked this house, it was the right house in the right subdivision, I may even go down to this lender and say, what's it going to take for me to assume this loan? Now, I don't like assuming loans, but you know, if they would let me take over this loan and give me a rate like 7% for 30 years, I'd sign whatever they want me to sign. Is there any risk in this loan? Not if it has a 7% interest rate. Now, if it's got 12% interest rate, I'm not assuming anything, okay? But if it has a good interest rate, I would do that. Typically, I take subject to when I take over loans. But I mean, but if it's a good loan, now interest rates are low, aren't they? Okay, if you can lock in a good low interest rate right now, even if it costs you $500 and you have to sign a bunch of papers that you don't like, do it. It's good business, isn't it? 7% is cheap money, and it makes that house worth. The payments will be $500 a month on a $150,000 house. That house will start pumping out $400 or $500 a month cash flow from day one. That'd be a good deal. Yes, ma'am.
You said you have to go in and,
No, but this is not a house that we're going to go in and remodel.
No.
This is a house that needs to be cleaned up. This is a house I can send the guy over and have him work for a week, and the house will look all better. He can do a little painting, a little carpet cleaning. It needs cosmetic work. It needs yard work. It doesn't need a new roof, new plumbing, new electrical, that kind of stuff. No. If you had something that needed structural work and you had a $30,000 budget, then it's a whole different game. Then you've got to figure out how to solve that problem.
don't throw your part of it on the table.
Well, you could. You could. I mean, if it needed $30,000 worth of work, you could do that. You could say, okay, you get the first 190, but then I get the next 30, and then we go 50-50. I mean, if that's what it's going to take. So if you find somebody who has a problem that they can't fix, a bad roof, bad plumbing, bad electrical, some serious deficiencies that's going to take some serious money to fix, then you can do that. Let me warn you not to get involved in those deals. Because typically when you start fixing things like that, your original budget is 30, but before you get done, you got 70 grand in the house. Yeah, okay, but I mean, it's an expensive thing to do, and especially for your first deal, if you're kind of thinly capitalized, don't get into major rehab jobs. They always take longer than you think. They always cost more than you think. Yeah. So, I mean, avoid a major rehab job. That's what I'm talking about. 2 here says, have them borrow against the property and then lease option at a break-even cash flow and reinvest their cash. I didn't come up with this idea. A good friend of mine came up with this idea. He had a investor he found who owned his house free and clear. And the investor had taken somebody else's seminar, not mine, and he bought this house. It looked like a good idea. He paid all cash for it. He paid more than retail, and it had been sitting empty for a year because he couldn't find a tenant he liked. Some people just aren't landlords. Oops. And if you're not a landlord and you're not going to like anybody who wants to rent your house, you probably shouldn't be in this business. Because the people that want to rent your house sometimes aren't the people that you want to do business with. So he had bought the wrong house in the wrong place, paid too much for it because he took somebody else's class, and now he's got this free and clear house out there that he can't stand to rent because he can't stand anybody who wants to rent there. My buddy came along and made this offer. He said, I'll tell you what I'll do. You go out and borrow $100,000 against your house. Okay? Borrow it. Put the money in the bank. I will lease this house from you for the payments on that $100,000 with an option to buy 1/2 interest for $50,000. So you get half the profit over the $100,000. I get half the profit over $100,000, but I'll make all the payments on the $100,000. So if the payments are $800 a month, he would lease that house for $800 a month. So the fellow who owns this house now doesn't have to worry about management anymore. This house is a done deal. He still owns it. He gets half the profit from this point forward. But the second part of this deal was, now we'll take the $100,000 you borrowed and we'll go out and buy more real estate. And we'll do the same 50-50 deal on all the other property we buy. That was very creative, I thought. Very creative. It was a way for my friend to generate $100,000 cash on property that wasn't even his. You got this other fellow to go down and borrow the money and give him the money. Okay? And did there have to be some trust here? There had to be trust. My friend knew what he was doing. He was a good guy. He was a good landlord. He was a good investor. He could take this guy around and show him several other properties that he owned and managed. So, I mean, he developed some credibility. He just didn't meet him in a bar and make this deal, in 10 minutes. This took a while to make, but it was a really good deal for both of them. And it started off a long-term relationship that worked it was very profitable for both of them because he was able to take that $100,000 out now. What kind of interest is he paying on this? None. No payments, no interest. He was able to take that $100,000 out where he's not paying any payments on it and use it as down payments on several other properties that he bought below the market. And again, he gets 50% of the profits on all those properties he bought. So that turned out to be a really good deal for him.
What's the LTV of 100K?
It was worth more than that because the guy had to borrow up at 100. So I mean, I can't tell you exactly, but he said it's probably 120. Yeah, about 120. So the guy didn't make any money on day one on that, but this guy had a problem he can't solve. Who's got the record? Who knows somebody who's had a house sitting empty the longest in here? Anybody notice a landlord had a house sitting empty for more than a year? How long?
Talked to a guy who tried to get a house for them, he's had it sitting empty for 5 years now.
5 years.